Anyone who travels, frequent flyer, or loyalty programs, or they are called, play an outsized role in our airline choices. While most don't want to admit it, the lure of a free flight or an upgrade is almost irresistible. While most of us are active participants in loyalty programs, few of us really understand why they are so beneficial to the airlines. What you find out might surprise you as much as it did me. I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for being part of our international community of industry leaders here on A Seat at the Table. Today we are joined by Mark Ross-Smith, founder of industry news site Travel Data Daily and CEO of Status Match. He has 20 years' experience leading loyalty programs in telecoms and travel, most recently at Malaysian Airlines. In this podcast, Mark will be unpacking his insider knowledge about how these programs work, including how loyalty programs are actually a revenue stream and often a profit center for airlines, new ways that airlines are using customer data to find hidden revenue opportunities, and how loyalty programs can work against a company if they are not well executed. Loyalty is a challenge that many companies are facing amongst their leadership and team members. For an organization to be successful, it needs the right people in the right positions. However, finding and recruiting these people can be difficult, especially in certain markets. That's why top corporations and even smaller enterprises rely on AsiaNet consultants to help them fill key positions. Since 1988, AsiaNet has been working in partnership with its global clients to help them make the right strategic hires. They have a well-earned reputation for being able to fill even those difficult-to-fill positions. So if you need to recruit new talent or think that you might be doing that soon, head on over to their website. That's asianetconsultants.com. asianetconsultants.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes. Now let's sit down with Mark and find out what's really going on with these customer loyalty programs. Mark, thank you so much for joining us here on A Seat at the Table. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say with regard to loyalty programs.
Hey, Jane, it's great to be here with you today. Loyalty is my life, so I'm happy to share some experiences about loyalty, especially in the airline and travel industry today.
Perfect. Well, consumers have been increasingly fickle, as we know, a lot less loyal than they used to be, perhaps because there's just so much choice available.
I'll talk to a couple of things that might be interesting specifically in travel right now, because loyalty in travel has been really quite affected the last few years. A lot of airlines and hotels have extended, the loyalty status for some of their top members. And what that means is a lot of these people that have your gold or platinum type status have they're sort of unhooked now from the brand they are normally loyal to. And so they've got a chance to really try another brand, try a new airline, try a new hotel, try something new for the first time, because they don't have to worry about trying to keep their status because it's been extended generally for the last couple of years. And this represents a bit of a problem because in the travel industry, in airlines specifically, about 30% of airline revenue comes from the top 5% of loyalty members. And so, you really want to do everything you can to try and keep these people stuck on your brand and not, have the gaze guy across the room looking at a competitor. You're thinking, should I, go try them or not? But I think, to your point, there's a few hallmark traits of a good loyalty program, and this runs across industries as well. Fundamentally, a loyalty program should generate more revenue than it costs to run, right?
Right.
And I know this sounds so simple, but a lot of, especially you start looking at retail loyalty programs, businesses invest pretty heavily in loyalty and retention efforts, but often it can actually cost more to run that when you factor in staffing costs and all this kind of stuff than the sort of revenue that comes off the back end of that. And it's super simple, but obviously in airline loyalty programs make billions and billions of dollars globally. In fact, airline loyalty programs in some countries, the loyalty program as a business with its own P&L, its own standalone thing, is actually worth more than the airline itself.
Is that true? Wow.
Yeah, and it's been a bit of a flip in the travel in the last couple of years when all these numbers started coming out and people started realizing, hang on, all these points and miles I've been collecting actually have a lot of real value on the market. What it's meant is loyalty has sort of jumped up a few rungs internally in a lot of companies. So instead of it being part of a marketing division, suddenly now it's on the board. Suddenly it's a C-level role, because especially in the US, a lot of these loyalty programs have actually saved the airline industry.
Have they really? Wow. When you talk about the fact that loyalty programs have their own P&L, I mean, how does that work? Could you explain a little bit about where the revenue profitability is? It doesn't seem intuitive, so to speak, or maybe it just doesn't seem intuitive to me.
So it's going to look and feel a little different for different businesses. I'll talk to airline so everyone can get an idea. Yeah. So in airline, there's two parts. So there's what we call the business of loyalty. So this is, everyone's got the credit card, they're earning the points and the miles, when they transactions at the store kind of thing. You earn points. What in the background, what's happening is the bank is buying those points because they're earning revenue when you swipe your card. There's interchange fee that they share. They're buying points off the airline and they're putting the points into your airline loyalty account, right? So this is cash flow for the loyalty program that they use generally as working capital. And that's cash up front. You might not use those miles for 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 years, right? So they sit on this cash for all this time, using it for working capital, whatever they want to use it for. The last couple of years have been using it to fund the airline, obviously.
Right.
And this is high margin revenue, right? So American Airlines, for example, in one of their SEC filings, mentioned that the gross margin of selling these points to banks is about 72%. And so if you look at a 72% gross, I think net was 50 something, I want to say 52, 53, which is pretty amazing when you consider the margin on an airline seat is it's not near 50%, I can tell you.
Right.
And so what this means is these loyalty businesses, which are effectively marketing or technology companies, suddenly because they're creating high margin, very sustainable revenue, the way they're valued on the market is very different to how an airline is valued. And so that's where you get in this position where the business of loyalty can be worth more on the market than the actual airline itself.
Interesting. Now, in terms of airlines, we've often been told, at least, that those miles that people accumulate are a liability to the airline. How does that work?
So they're actually an asset as well, right? So there's a future liability, but if you never use those miles, it's not really a liability. Just in theory, when the airline receives revenue from the bank, there's a portion set aside as cash that can only be realized when the redemption occurs. So when you use your miles to redeem for your flight or a gift card or whatever it might be, at that point, that's where it's recognized.
Right.
And there's a marketing revenue component split up in there as well. So is it a liability? Yes, and not really in some ways, depends who you ask. But ultimately, it comes down to cash, right?
Yes.
You've got all this cash coming in the door. It costs you less to run the program than you're generating. People like the allure, they like the romance of, I can save miles and fly first class to London and eat caviar and champagne on the plane. It's the dream. Right. That's what airlines are really selling in these loyalty programs. And people, that's the imagery they put out there. And you see it, I see it, and you go, wow, I wouldn't mind the beach in the Maldives. It sounds quite good. I just need 60,000 miles or whatever it is. And so I'll keep spending. I'll keep flying with the airline. I'll keep engaging with this brand. And so that's how they keep you sticky and really engaged with their loyalty program, because there's this dream that you think you want, you might, not everyone actually ever gets to. But, it's a bit unique to airlines. The coffee shop down the road doesn't exactly have first class seats to give away. And so a bit of a different proposition for them.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right about that. You will stay with the same airline oftentimes, even if it is a bit more expensive or if the service isn't quite what you might like it to be, just for the sake of getting to that next tier or getting those miles.
Exactly. There's a thing called the gold gradient effect, which is the closer you get to the next tier or the next sort of benefit you can unlock, the more willing people are to engage and spend with the brand, which means they're more likely to, in an airline's case, book directly with the airline as opposed to a travel agent or a third party. They're just the willingness to spend is a lot higher. Entirely irrational. People just I need to get there. I've been saving up for the 6 months. I'm going to get there. I just need 100 more miles. I'm going to spend 20,000, whatever it is, to get there.
Right. Yeah,
And so
I think that's true.
there's a lot of people that are very attached to their loyalty status and the perks that come with that, because I mean, how do you put a price on some of these things? You're about to board the aircraft and they call for, gold members, and you're a gold member. And so there's 300 people lined up in that economy class queue, and you're a gold member, and you just waltz past them all, thinking, oh, this is why I fly this airline, so I don't have to line up with everyone else. And that
Right.
moment, that 10 seconds, it's just that feeling you get. You're like, this is why I'm loyal. And so there's this whole ego part to the loyalty program psychology and why that's really effective.
Yeah, it certainly makes a lot of sense. And you can see it's effective because everything you're describing, I see people doing that. I've seen myself do it. So you can really understand that, yeah, that definitely, it's a great way, particularly in the case of some of those things you mentioned, like letting people board early. It really doesn't cost them anything. And it has a tremendous value. I guess that's the sweet spot, you might say, in loyalty, is where you can actually give that customer something that's very meaningful to them and that really doesn't cost you anything at all.
Exactly. That's really, there's a lot of power in that. Not obviously airlines, I think, nail this really well. Outside of that, if you start looking at retail or e-commerce businesses, it's a little different. But
Yes.
if they can figure out, I mean, it's going to look and feel different for every business. If they can figure out what costs that business next to nothing, or it's some sort of digital product, but the value to the customer is way outsized, disproportionately more. If you can start packing a few of those benefits, bundling them together, suddenly you've got a subscription program, maybe, or
Right.
something interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. What has changed, or maybe nothing has changed since the pandemic with regard to loyalty programs?
So, I mean, in travel, obviously, we talked about how loyalty programs worth more than some airlines these days. That's a
Right.
pretty big shift. Obviously, the cost of travel has skyrocketed in some parts of the world. This means some people are more price sensitive.
Right.
Obviously, some airlines have lowered capacity, not flying the degree that they used to be a few years ago. What that means is people are sometimes forced to look at new brands as
Right.
well. They can't go back to a brand the tried and tested. For the first time, they're open to something new, where whether they want to or not, they might be really hooked on one airline brand, and suddenly they can't fly that airline anymore. They can't engage with that brand just because of the factors in the world. And so for the first time, they're open to a new idea, open to something else. We sort of see that in our business as well, because I mean, we help people switch their airline status, right? So we see a bunch of people, looking for something new, looking for that status with that new airline. And so, price for the first time is really coming into a consideration factor for some of these people where it previously may not have, right? Because, everyone, they're just sewn onto the brand, and they just blindly go to blah blah blah.com, and that's the brand they book, and that's just how it rolls. They don't look at price. They're just like, I need that. I know when I get in the aircraft, John there is going to give me my favorite mocktail, and that's how it
Right.
rolls.
Right.
But travel has changed quite a lot in the last few years, and loyalty programs really are the one thing that have kept airlines, especially, it's kept them there.
Right.
It's kept people hooked on there as well.
Interesting. Now, oftentimes the success of customer loyalty programs is measured in terms of the number of return customers or whether current customers are increasing their spending. Are there other metrics that companies need to be looking at? I mean, if so, what makes them important?
So yes, there are. There's a couple that I'm going to share with you. In the airline world, I kind of talk about loyalty metrics. It's kind of like a cockpit, right? You're sitting in the cockpit and you see all these dials, all these gauges, all these blinking lights everywhere. And it's very pretty, it's very distracting. But really, there's a couple that stand out. But more importantly, there's not one metric that says everything's okay. You can look at a couple and go, okay, we're not going to crash. Everything's going, airspeed's good. We're not going down. There's a couple that kind of stand out. And these are what I call the golden loyalty metrics. And there's really one that stands out, but there's a couple that I'll share. The first one is share of wallet. And loosely what this means is how actually loyal you are. So it's not about how much you spend, it's about how loyal you are. So I make an example. Let's say you're taking 4 flights a year, for example, right? But that's 100% of all your flights, right? So your 4 flights a year may not be worth that much to the airline as such, but you're very loyal. There's a 100% share of wallet. Yeah. Whereas your cousin is doing 100 flights a year, right? But that's split between 2 or 3 different airlines. So actually, your cousin is less loyal, but
Right.
worth more,
Right.
right? So the share of wallet from your cousin may be 30, 50, 60% with one brand, one airline brand, whereas yours is 100%, right? So what that means is from a, let's look at CRM for a second here. What's the point in trying to get you to fly more if historically we know you're only going to do 4 flights a year? Whereas with your cousin, right, if we know we're not capturing 100% share of wallet, or I mean, ideally, we want to get more than 80, right?
Right.
So if you're not getting that, we know there's a bit more headroom. We know there's more that we could possibly shift over, some of that share shift of that wallet to sort of bring it back into the other. So you'd focus more of the marketing effort over there on your cousin, just because we know there's more, even though on paper they're a top tier customer, they're spending a lot, they look like a fantastic customer. So share of wallet's really a really big one, and this is really cross industry as well.
Yes.
There's different ways to get this kind of data, and intelligence varies by industry. The second one, which is pretty normal, is the customer lifetime value, and tracking that. And someone that is a new customer to business starts displaying behavior or habits or engagement that is similar to someone that is an ultra high value customer, you want to put them on the pathway to that ultra high value customer. You want to start sending them the right things so they start spending the right type of money with your business as fast as possible. Make it super, super, super easy, because there's all sorts of propensity modelings and stuff you can put in place to sort of track and measure that to see people on that path. But lifetime value will fluctuate over time as well, but it's a really, really useful one to sort of keep on the pulse. So those two really are the two big standout metrics in terms of what you track. I mean, in airline, there's about 50 other things you could track as well, but none of them say that everything is super healthy or not. It's more of a, and the other thing to keep in mind with generally with loyalty, it can be okay if your loyalty program, I know it's counterproductive to what I said earlier, but it can lose money.
Right.
If it means another area of the business makes twice as much, for example.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because overall, it should be about the group or the company or the business, holistic, looking at everything, a balanced scorecard, right?
Yeah.
And so
I think that's true.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, really, because I think the pandemic has challenged many, many businesses because people had a way they were doing things beforehand. And then suddenly everything was blown apart. And particularly in travel, where you had travel ceased, right, for certain periods of time. And then it came back, and it came back faster in some areas and slower in other parts of the world. And I think that airlines are having to probably think about that. What do you do to get those customers back? And I'm sure they're facing some tough decisions.
100%. In loyalty, the message was, you can't fly right now, so we'll extend your status for free until, borders open up and you can fly again. So a bit of that early on. And then, during that, the message was still there, hey, keep the credit card, keep spending, we know you're at home, we know you can't leave the country, but, keep spending that credit card because we make a lot of money out of it. And,
right.
Then we started to find out that some airlines are actually making more money out of that credit card than they were flying people around the world.
Well, yeah, exactly. They didn't have the overhead.
Exactly. So what's happened is people have been building up these big points and miles balances without being able to redeem them. So there's this big influx of newly created points and miles, but there hasn't been the outflow of people redeeming these points and miles. So people have got these massive balances. So now they're looking to use them now because things are opening up. So that's why, we're seeing like points flights and more redemption options where people can start using these miles for more things, because there's this, whole revenge travel thing now where people are sort of been saving it up for a couple of years. And now that things are open, like, well, I'll show you world. I'll make up for the last 2 years and, sit on an airplane for the next month and just fly around and hopefully use my miles. So, yeah.
Is that challenging airlines who are hoping to get revenue back, or are the miles so profitable, as you said, that they'd just be happy to have people use the miles?
So the demand is there for travel. I mean, airlines will take your cash any day of the week over using miles, don't get me wrong.
Right.
And I think a lot of that is what's happening right now. It's pretty expensive to travel to some parts of the world right now. I booked a bunch of flights in the last sort of month or so to many parts of the world, and 4 to 5 times what it used to cost is pretty normal right now. So airlines
Really?
are totally milking it in some parts of the world. They're totally cream. Airlines that weren't previously profitable pre-pandemic suddenly are mysteriously profitable all of a sudden, just because prices are sky high and demand is there.
Right.
Good for them, yeah. But it does raise the question of people that have been told to save up your loyalty points, to save up your miles, for the last couple of years, and you've been eyeing off that first class redemption to New York, and suddenly you can't use your points and miles, and so the question then goes through your mind is, well, why bother? Why should I be saving these things when I can't even use them when I want to? And I think this is going to be a big thing that airlines need to tackle. If people can't redeem the points that they've been saving up for, what happens? Do they get rid of the credit card? Do they stop engaging with the program? Do they just start, I'll just fly cheapest airline, I'll just pay the cheapest business class that I can get because that's what I was going to do anyway? And this sort of could have a pretty big impact on the business. This is what I was talking about. Loyalty programs look at holistically, right? So sometimes it could be worth a loyalty program taking a hit for a certain period of time to satisfy the people that want to redeem their points for whatever it is, to help the long-term value of the business, or the short to medium term, I should say, just to sort of get that outflow of points there so people can start redeeming, because that's why we all collect points, right? Because we want to one day use them for something that we really want. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That might be, I got my 10 stamps. Now I want my free coffee. Right. As simple as that. Actually, funny story. My coffee shop down the road has that exact thing. You get 5, 9, get one. Your 10th is free. And I had my 10, or my 9 stamps. I went to get my free coffee. I was very excited. And they said, oh, you've got the old card. We use the red cards now, not the blue cards. I was so disappointed.
Yeah. I think when companies do that, that's really penny wise and pound foolish.
And they just look at you like it's totally normal. Like, well, you missed out by a week. Too bad.
Right.
Yep.
I know. And it's a cup of coffee.
Exactly. And it's always the expensive places that do it. It's never the cheap ones.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because you're right. I have had that experience with small things as well as certain situations with airlines, and I just don't go back to those places. It's just a simple situation. As you pointed out earlier, there's a lot of choice that people have, and there's more and more choice, it seems, every day, easier to access. So it is a bit unwise, in my opinion, to play around with loyalty.
You're totally right. People get really emotionally invested in the loyalty program. You don't necessarily wake up every day and think, I really love Coca-Cola. It's the best thing ever. You don't,
right.
But you may wake up thinking, I've got enough points now to book a trip to wherever.
Right.
Right. Because there's this emotional connection there. And I think, if brands get in between that emotional connection and sort of break that, I don't call it emotional trust, if they sever that, I think it's really difficult to mend it or bring it back again. And, once people leave a brand, once they disconnect from a brand for emotional reasons, getting it back is really effing expensive as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because you have that disappointment, even if it's a cup of coffee. The fact that, like you said, they said, oh, well, you're using the blue card and now we use the red card. It's a minor thing, but I think the feeling is that you've been cheated because you didn't miss the deadline. If you missed the deadline, you missed the deadline, fair enough. But you feel cheated. And who wants to do business with someone who you feel either cheats you? There's a particular airline that I flew tremendously before the pandemic, and that has proven to be a bit opportunistic. And you make that break and you find someone new, and then you become loyal to them. It's very hard, as you're pointing out, for that previous company or brand to win you back. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
If you're a pet owner who wants real talk on training, behavior, and everyday life with animals, check out the Fresh Patch Podcast. Hosted by Drew and Gabe, we cover the wins, the challenges, and everything in between. So wherever you listen, search the Fresh Patch Podcast, where good pets get it.
And what's interesting is we see people want to be loyal to that new brand. Like they're actively seeking like a new. It's almost like they're seeking a new partner, right? It's like I
Exactly
want
right.
this. I
Yes.
want this to work because the last marriage failed. It's like
Right.
I'm determined to make this one work. I'm going to put even more. I'm going to spend so much money with this brand. I'll show the other guy.
That's so true. I mean, I think you've summed that up perfectly. It's you want to prove that, wow, I found something new and these guys are great. And even if they're not as great, they don't have to do much to be able to win you over at that point. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. I think you're making a very good point that companies do have to think in a little more detailed approach to loyalty and what actually matters. And, once you lose someone, it is difficult to get them back.
Totally.
Now, how can companies evaluate their customer data and find potential new revenue opportunities? What should they be looking for, in your opinion?
I'll give you an example again. In airline, it's they don't just sell data to make money. They don't get the email list and sell it to a third party. And, there's $1 million. That was easy. Some people think that happens. It doesn't. Generally, it's about using that data, combining with something else, maybe a third party, and then using it for internal purposes, right? So, airlines use this all the time for like pricing and revenue management on for selling seats. So one example might be, historically, think pre-pandemic, how they would price a seat would be looking at historical data and going, how much we think we could sell this seat on based on the time of year, all these sorts of things, right? Using
Yes.
historical data. And that obviously last 3 years has destroyed that model. And so they start looking at bringing other data as well to combine with their internal data to get a more accurate idea of what they could do and how much they could charge people, because you want to charge people the most you possibly can without people, crying at how expensive things are. But even then, they'll still go there. So they start looking, buying things like credit card transaction data, bank data, this kind of stuff. And so it was key indicators. If we rewind a year or so ago, where people in certain cities there was an increase in fine dining, for example, transactions like credit, people just spending credit on fine dining. That was an indicator that people are willing to go out, wanted to get out and travel and do more, and therefore, hey, let's start sending offers and put more aircraft on those kind of routes and stuff. So that was a way to use data in a way that made commercial sense to see where they should start, servicing more again. There's basic examples in loyalty programs, like, if you're like a platinum member or something, and you won't be paying a seat selection, for example, to select a seat on a plane, simple things like don't try to make you pay for it if you're getting it for free. Show you something else instead, right? Like this is
Right.
super. I know this sounds super basic. A lot of companies still don't do that, so it's kind of
Really.
need to reiterate it every so often. Like, hey guys, this is super simple stuff. Another good example is predicting churn. People
Right.
are likely to sort of move away from your company. I think telcos don't do a too bad job with this, actually. Telecom industry, because they've got some pretty interesting data about where people go and who they associate with and stuff like that. But like what we see is if someone does what we call status match with another airline, I mean, that's a massive indicator that they're about to shift business to a competing carrier. If people cancel a credit card, with the bank, that can be an indicator that they're about to shift something as well. And, there's a bit of information sharing at corporate level there that,
Right.
helps certain parties in certain situations. And so that's a bit of, I think the real magic is you've got your own data and whatever that looks like, and you've got some insights that you can get out of that. When you combine those insights with someone else's insights, like a third party, right? And you combine those and there's some magic there you can sort of do. You'll get some brand new insight. And here's the interesting thing, that new insight you create, it's not owned by the customer at that point. It's not customer's data, it's your data. It's the company's data. So you own that then. So you can do whatever it's not personally identifiable. You can
Right.
sort of almost do whatever you want with it, you could use that for marketing intelligence just to improve basic things like email open rates and click-throughs or app downloads and all sorts of useful applications there. So yeah, it's not about selling email lists to other people and spamming emails out. There's a bit more to it, but generally, if you're running any kind of loyalty proposition, you've got some super rich data there that you can use in many other ways. And I think it's about getting really creative on how you could use it, because there's ways that you can also rent those insights to partners that you work with. Or if you run like a retail store or something, there's, if you've got your neighbors around, some interesting stuff you could do there.
I think that's really interesting. Well, Mark, thank you so much for sharing tremendous information, things that even as someone who's flown quite frequently prior to the pandemic, never really realized. So it's really been great to have you on the show. Where can we reach out to you? Where can people connect with you?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on there. I post a lot. So LinkedIn is great. Otherwise, check out traveldatadaily.com. If you are a frequent flyer, or like yourself, obviously, statusmatch.com is fantastic community of people that, if you're looking for status with a new airline, new hotel, we can certainly hook that up for you.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to include all of that in the show notes for the episode. And I want to thank you again for taking the time to be with us.
Thanks, Jane. It's been a pleasure.
I'd also like to thank our sponsor, AsiaNet Consultants. AsiaNet's a specialist in recruiting top talent in Asian markets. Since 1988, AsiaNet has been working in partnership with its global clients to help them make the right strategic hires. They have a well-earned reputation for being able to fill even those difficult-to-fill positions. Learn about how they can help you find the best talent by heading over to their website, asianetconsultants.com. That's asianetconsultants.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something from it, I would love to hear about it. If you'd like to support the show, please hit the subscribe button. And if you can take a minute to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or other channels, that would be fabulous. Don't forget to check out our podcast website, seatpodcast.com. That's SEAT podcast.com. If there's something you'd like to share, ideas, suggestions, or comments, please feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining me and being part of our international community. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.